to call the special council meeting to order. And before we begin, I would like to ask the town manager to please read the disclaimer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a reminder to all residents and participants that this meeting is being recorded on the town website. The council meeting portion of this segment will have an opportunity. Actually, I don't know. Are we going to have a public
Yes.
We'll have an opportunity for public comment after the items are introduced. So if any residents wish to make public comments, please utilize the raise hand motion and I will send you a message confirming that you'll have an opportunity to speak. We do ask that folks please hold your questions until you've been called on. And when you make your comments, please state your name and street that you live on for records keeping purposes. And please limit your comments to 2 minutes per person. If this meeting does get interrupted, I will immediately end the call and send out new instructions via email blast. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, everyone. This special meeting was called per our town code at the request of 3 council members to discuss a resolution introduced by Council Member Circo. So I will turn it over to him. And after that, I will take a round of questions from the council. Then, of course, we will have the opportunity for public comment, and then I will entertain a motion. So, Council Member Circo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, council members, for agreeing to hold a special council meeting. I think there may have been some confusion about the start time for this meeting. So that might be why Robin Barr, I just sent Robin an email and why maybe some residents aren't joining in either, but let's proceed. I just have a few comments here. So when I first took the oath of office as a midshipman at the age of 17 at the U.S. Naval Academy to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I was literally, perhaps a little naively, but literally prepared to put my life on the line in defense of democracy. I never expected that 4 decades later, I would find myself compelled to take an action against the President of the United States in defense of the Constitution. As local Maryland legislators, my fellow council members and I have all sworn to support the Constitution of the United States. And the storming of the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, was an attack on the Constitution and democracy, which demands our attention. That's my introduction. I drew a lot of the language for this proposed resolution from the Vermont legislation passed by the House and the Senate of Vermont last Friday. And if any council members have questions or comments, I'm happy to address them.
Okay, thank you,
Council. I'm happy to. I was just going to say I'm happy to pull it up on my screen if anybody would like me to.
And is it also possible to put it in the chat in case any members of the public? I don't know if that's possible.
Sure,
Council,
yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. Council
Okay.
President, welcome, Councilmember Barr.
I would
Council
like to
President,
see it. I would like to see the document. Thank you.
Council President Shaw, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you, Council Member Zoighauser.
No questions. I want to thank Franny for coming up with the idea and I want to thank Steve for putting it into play. I share your feelings.
Thank you, Councilmember Peel. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I think Barbara's confusing this as my idea, but my idea was for the condolence letter. This was Steve's idea, and the only thing I contributed here was just to let him know that Vermont had done something that might have been useful.
I'm not confused. I get it. I understood it. You sent him to Vermont, and I think even said publicly that was useful. So thank you, Franny.
Okay.
Okay, and thank you, Steve, again. Thank you both.
I I don't have any questions on this. I'm glad we're doing it, and I appreciate Steve having the courage to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barr, do you have any questions?
No, Steve had reviewed it with me earlier and I fully support it.
Thank you. Mr. Town Manager, are there any comments or questions from our residents or guests?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Council. Are you prepared to make a motion?
So I guess, oops. So I move that we approve this resolution.
Thank you. Is there a
This
second?
resolution to seek the removal of Donald J. Trump as President of the United States.
Thank you. Is there a second? I saw PL as second. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. And we will, as I had mentioned to a few of you, we will now push this out to media. And also, I think we should send it to the MML because they like to know when municipalities are doing things like this. Now, before I adjourn, I believe Councilmember Peel had a request, so I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. I drafted a condolence letter to Congressman Jamie Raskin and circulated it to the council, and everybody signed off on it, and I just wanted to bring it up. I wasn't sure whether we needed to vote on something like that since it didn't seem to be necessarily a policy position, but if we do need to vote, I wonder if we could.
Well, it would be up to the council. I mean,
In any event, if we don't need to vote, I wanted to suggest that we release the letter to Matt and Linda for to send out to Congressman Raskin's office. And I just wanted to also ask whether
I would
everybody wanted to
suggest,
sign it.
I would suggest that you vote on it because then it makes it official in the record
Okay.
and you've done so much work on it, but it's totally up to you.
Is it
So
possible to vote on
if
it
you're-
tonight?
Yes, if you're planning to, so if you are, then let me just go around and use our usual process and then
Okay.
see if there's any public comment. Council President Shaw, do you have any questions? We couldn't hear you.
Thank you, Franny. No questions.
Thank you. Council Member Zoighauser.
Yes, I mean it, Franny. Thank you again.
Thank you. Council Member Circo.
No questions. Thank you, Franny. It's a very nice thing to do and very appropriate.
Thank you. Councilmember Barr.
No questions either. And yes, it certainly is very appropriate. Thanks for thinking of it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Town Manager, are there any comments or questions from our?
No.
Okay, hearing none. Are you prepared to make a motion?
Just before I do, I just wanted to point out that I drafted it as including a place for the mayor and for the town manager to also sign onto it and I just wanted to ask you both whether that was something you wanted to do.
Sure.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
I'd
That's
be
the way
happy
you
to.
drafted
Yep,
it, so
thank
that's
you.
fine.
So as drafted, I move that we approve the letter of condolence to send to Congressman Jamie Raskin.
Thank you. Is there a second? I saw Zoighauser first. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Thank
And we
you.
will get that out promptly, and we will also put it in all of our communication that the council has done a very nice thing.
Okay.
And with
thank you.
that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Jeffrey, oh yeah, but can I ask one question? Is there, what is today? Is there any hope of putting they're both such thoughtful pieces. Is there any hope of putting them in the journal?
Yeah, because the deadline isn't until,
If you
deadline.
all would
so
feel,
we'll talk with the.
yeah, I think.
I would like that.
Okay, we'll be happy to do that.
Steve, would you like that? Steve?
Absolutely. That's a great idea. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Okay.
Okay, and at this time, given that we have 1 minute before the council president calls the work session, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn the council meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Thank you. Council President Shaw, it's all yours.
Well, we're a minute early. I'd like to call the work session to order. I hope you all have had a chance to get,
Okay,
I hope you all had a chance to get through the material. The first item on the agenda, we reviewed last time and people wanted to make some suggestions. I want to thank Barbara and others who added some material to the guide for the town committees. It would be nice if we could agree to text today so that the committees that are well into formation have this and know what to do. So does anyone have a comment on the guide?
I do have sort of an administrative comment, Marnie. And that is, who's going to watch over this? For example, it says that communications with the town lawyer have to be pre-approved. So will Ron be told that or how is this going to work?
well, the whole point of this is that the committees will get this and then they will know that if this is so that everybody's on the same page and they'll know that if they want to talk to the town lawyer, it has to go through channels.
So the assumption is that they'll read it for starters,
Yeah.
they'll read it and
Ron- Ron- yeah, and Ron doesn't take a call from anybody unless it's been cleared.
okay,
So
great.
there's
Just think, his budget line
So there's
item
no problem.
as is.
There-
Is Ron joining us?
He does.
Yeah, he's supposed to. He asked me for the link earlier today, so and I talked to him, so I'm expecting him to join.
He never talks to anybody without asking me, because that's what the code says.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Never been a problem.
Perfect.
I had one suggestion, Barbara, that I mentioned to Barbara. I don't know whether others would feel the same. In the purpose section, I just wondered whether we wanted to leave the word sole purpose in or take it out. It seemed awfully restrictive to me, but I can understand why it was drafted that way. I don't feel strongly about it. I just wondered what others thought.
Marnie, I will explain. I've seen some emails where committee
Hi,
chairs
Ron.
have
Okay, all right.
have
Oh, it's fine.
have sort of gotten off course a little bit, and those conversations that I've seen they're not, I don't know, they don't seem to go that well. So that's why I think it's better for them, for starters, to think that their purpose is to advise and make recommendations to the mayor and to the council. Now, obviously, they do other things, but that is their main purpose. That's just that was my thinking behind that language. But
I don't feel strongly about it, but it was something I wanted to raise.
good.
'Cause
I mean, I think it's good to have that in there because I think it does draw a clear line between the role of committees and the role of the council members. I mean, I think, we may have, we would want to make it clear that, for instance, they wouldn't be necessarily introducing legislation on their own, for instance. And so, unless we ask them to. So, I think it's okay to leave it there. I don't know that this is really binding in any way. I think that, the council does have the flexibility to vote to give a specific assignment to a committee, and
I've been thinking about how some committees will hold educational events and so on.
Yeah, right. Some committees have
That's true.
events. In other words, that's and for some of them, that is their main function.
Yeah, I can see that point. That's a
See,
good
that's
point.
Robin-
That's a good point.
Robin, which committees is that a sole function for?
Well, I said main function rather than sole function, but
Which one is there? I can't even remember the last time we had
well,
a.
what, I mean,
a
what
full-
the communications committee, what does it do? It creates things, you know, it does the town journal, it does the website. It occasionally comes to council for things, but that's not its main role.
Well, it's not the communications committee doesn't do the journal. We have 2 journal editors. They provide the journal.
Right.
Usually,
but-
and the handbook and the directory is put out by the town. Their purpose is to improve communications, to come up with recommendations as to how to improve communication in the town. That's their purpose.
They're largely advising the journal. I mean, come on, you've been there. You know, a lot of the work is ideas for the journal and things like that.
But we have 2
But that's only because it's a coincidence that the journal editor is the chair of the committee. But that wouldn't always be the case.
What if we changed it to say, may establish volunteer committees for the purpose, take out sole, of advising and providing recommendations to the mayor and to the council, and to provide educational opportunities for residents in the town.
I think that's I think you're going to pull in, you're going to scare people off who are serving on the committees by adding all that language. That's just
So,
my
well,
opinion.
what do you,
Maybe
what are we trying to do with this first sentence? Are we trying to limit their behavior? Or are we trying to sort of cover the whole scope of what we expect committees to do?
My intent was to make sure that they knew that they were there to provide recommendations. And that's their main.
Yeah, how about the primary purpose rather than the sole purpose?
Yeah, I could
That's a good change.
get on board with that.
Sense to me, that would be good. If everybody's satisfied with that, that would be one small change. Is there anything else that struck people? I know Matt worked on this as well as Barbara. I actually worked on it a little bit too. Our goal is to get this in shape tonight to put on the February agenda. Is everybody comfortable with that at this point?
Yes.
Hmm.
Anybody disagree? Okay.
I
So-
had one, if I may really quickly, Marnie, I had one question that is not necessarily covered by this that came up today. If a committee wants to put together a survey or a petition or things like that, do you feel like they have the authority to create that on their own, or should that be then approved by the council before the committee puts it out?
Is Ron on the call now, Matt?
Yes.
Oh, he is. Okay, great. Thanks.
I think it should be approved by the council because sometimes those surveys require spending money. To the extent that you get an outside company to manage it or something like that. That's my first thought anyway. I don't know if there's any other reason.
We did get into some issues with a survey that was recently done about what was public information or not. And so I think this is an area where I would want to turn to our attorney to make sure that whatever the town is sending out under town stationery is understood by everybody for what the limits are and how it gets shared and so on. So I think that's an important thing to straighten out before surveys go out to residents.
I
Yeah,
was-
and occasionally, oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say that, in my experience, it is a good idea for the council to review the survey before it goes out, just there, so there are no surprises and so that the council agrees that the questions are appropriate. To use, a hypothetical, if the survey contained a statement or question that was geared towards a specific policy position that the council didn't agree with, then the council might want to catch that before the survey is issued, for example.
And can I just add, because this is a question, I just listened to the Stormwater Committee meeting, and might add Ellen Globacard is doing such a fabulous job.
Yeah.
They are, and this is a question for Ron relating to what you just said, they are also interviewing people in town about stormwater issues and the like. Is that, are the results of their interviews public, and do they have to report who they're speaking with, or can they just say, I talked to person X and they said this? How does that work? Because
So
they're,
it depends on what records are created. Generally speaking, if any records are created, they're public and subject to inspection under the Public Information Act. An individual's notes are not deemed public records. So an individual committee member could meet with someone and jot down notes, and those notes would be confidential. But if the committee took oral statements and then transcribed them for their purposes of review and coming up with a recommendation, then those would be public records subject to inspection, I think.
and
But
would they
just
have-
informally talking to someone on the phone, interviewing someone and taking some notes, then no, they wouldn't have to disclose.
but if they're putting it together for a formal report, do
Mhm.
they have to give the name and address of the resident, or can they just say in the report, I spoke to, X person?
Well, yeah, if they have not been directed to only reference comments with name and address, then yes, they could keep those comments anonymous in a report.
Could I suggest, I think this is a very important topic, but could I suggest that in the interest of the council president getting her agenda accomplished tonight, and the fact that Matt and I view this guide as the baseline that can be amended in the future, that perhaps that discussion about what committees can do administratively can be put off so that we can get this forward, because I really want to get this on the agenda for February.
Yeah, my only concern, Mr. Mayor, is that that committee is moving along at a very fast pace, and similar to the Environment Committee, where they did the whole survey and then afterwards they were told, and they had to go back to the residents and say, whoops, we
Well-
made a mistake. I don't want
Well,
the same thing to happen.
We
with-
can, I understand your concern, and we can work on that
Good.
separately from getting this.
Perfect.
And perhaps we can find out later that it would require, but that's a separate issue that definitely we'll work on and report back to you by the February meeting.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, I could suggest that we add at the very end of the last section, committees may administer surveys which need to be approved in advance by the town council. It's a fairly simple phrase.
Yeah.
That sounds
Sure.
great, Ernie.
Right.
That
Oh,
sounds good.
yeah, and
Thank-
maybe say, or other outreach mechanisms, communications.
Yeah, I like that.
Depends on how far you
I like that too.
Right, like petitions.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Do we want to go so far as to say that that goes for educational materials too, or not? I mean, I'm not suggesting that we do. I'm just wondering, I feel like in the past, the Environment Committee has sent out like notices about how to recycle and things like that. And those, seems like we don't need to take council time up for those things.
Well, then if everybody's in agreement, then we will put this on the February agenda with right now 2 changes in the first line changing sole to primary,
Mhm.
and to add something at the very end. Committees may administer surveys or other outreach mechanisms which need to be approved in advance by the town council.
I want to just say one thing regarding what Councilmember Peel just mentioned about the committee. I believe it's ingrained in here that all communications regarding committee work to the town all goes through the manager. I think we have it in here that committees are not supposed to communicate directly with the town. It's supposed to all be through one person, the town manager. Now, some of what was done by that environment committee that you're thinking about was done individually. The chair did it as an individual. That petition was not, there was not a committee petition. That was him.
Town stationary.
Well, it shouldn't, remember, we told him afterward that he shouldn't have done that. So,
I don't
but
think
it
it
is,
says,
I think it's clear, I hope it's clear in this guide that there should be no communication between a committee directly.
Well, let's look for it. Let's find it. Can you
Isn't it-
scroll up, Matt?
Because it was in there, wasn't it in there? I think it was in there originally, Matt.
Let's just see if we can find it. If it's in there, then great.
I would hope that's what you would all want because.
Yeah, sounds
because-
right, but let's make sure it's in
one of
there.
the-
Here, let me share this working version that I have with the changes.
A lot of extra work has been created, and I don't want to name any particular committee, but it hasn't only been one, and it was mainly because there wasn't an agreement about the policies. Nothing was done maliciously. They just didn't, that's why this document is so important.
I think it's here.
I think it's there because
So maybe I wrote this at the end. Maybe this covers it.
I don't see requirement that the manager handles the communications with the
I know
rest.
it was in there. I don't know. I didn't realize it had been taken out, but it definitely, when
Okay.
I did the original draft, we had that in.
Let's just add,
Well, I don't
I
have
don't-
it printed out, but I don't see it at the moment. Scheduling and holding meetings. What comes after that?
Well, it also could be added before, or it could be amended at the council meeting. So I want the agenda to be.
Oh, yeah,
accomplished.
okay, that's fine. Let's just try to make sure it gets in there.
Is that something you can add since you and Jeffrey had talked about it before?
Sure. Yep.
Add a note now.
All right. Okay. So do you want to just circulate that to people too, Matt? Just so nobody's surprised? Okay.
I'll send out an updated draft tomorrow.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Well, we're making good progress. Okay. Item 2 is kind of a complicated item. I've provided a lot of information. The purpose of this section of the work session is to talk about the zoning text amendment that has been introduced by County Council person Will Jawando. And basically, his interest is in providing more housing and especially what's called missing middle housing, which is multifamily housing. It could be townhouses, duplexes, courtyard apartments, and other things. And would like to be able to provide that, especially in neighborhoods that are near transit, within 1 mile of transit or half a mile. And and those are traditionally single family neighborhoods. Ron will correct me if I don't say this properly. Under state law, the municipalities have the authority to, in Montgomery County, have the authority to regulate single-family housing. But if there were multifamily housing, we don't have any authority to regulate that. Ron, did you want to say more about that, since I'm not an expert on code here?
Sure. So I think it is intended by the state law that we have authority to regulate residential structures in our community. But there is some unclear language in the state statute that, you know, I bring to your attention. So, as you know, the town is in what's known as the regional district. The regional district is the area around Washington, D.C., in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. As neighborhoods started to develop, the state recognized there ought to be some sort of state agency overlooking all development. So the Park and Planning, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission was created and vested with subdivision and zoning controls, which means the municipalities themselves don't have zoning powers. The county councils of Montgomery and Prince George's counties wear state hats. They sit as district council members when they adopt subdivision and zoning controls. So the Regional District Act, Section 20-509, says, you know, despite exclusive zoning authority being vested in park and planning, we're going to give municipalities in the regional district limited authority to regulate such things as setbacks, mass, lot coverage, including impervious surface, fences, walls, and the like. That legislation was drafted at the request of Chevy Chase View and Chevy Chase Village in the 90s, after Chevy Chase View was found to not have the power to impose setbacks. Now, when my predecessor wrote the proposed language for the state legislature to look at, he wrote it very broadly to apply to all residential construction. And then it appears a county attorney submitted comments to the state legislature concerned that, for example, Chevy Chase Village might attempt to impose setbacks on Saks Fifth Avenue. And as a result of those comments, the proposed bill was modified to say we have this authority with respect to single-family structures on single-family lots. And so, you know, I think the intent was that we not regulate commercial buildings. I don't think it was contemplated at the time that in the R60 and R90 zones in this area, you know, there would be multifamily structures. But, you know, just point that out because, you know, someone might try to argue that, well, because this state law only references single family residences, you can't impose your setbacks on a quad or a duplex or the like. Yeah, happy to answer any questions. So
One thing I'd like you to clarify, Ron, because I could go back and forth on this. I have some concern about stormwater, and it looked to me like from your comments that we would not have the authority to regulate impervious surface on multifamily structures, but you thought we could do stormwater. Can you clarify that point?
sure. So yeah, just to reiterate, we're reserving the argument to be able to allege or take the position that we can regulate any residential construction in our town. But if that argument fails and someone were to say we can only regulate single family construction, then, you know, when you look at that code and see what sorts of things we're allowed to regulate, it includes, as I said, impervious surfaces, which is, you know, geared at lot coverage concerns, but also stormwater drainage concerns. And so then, you know, someone may argue, well, if you can only regulate impervious surfaces with respect to single family structures, then if someone wants to build a quad, you can't regulate the impervious surface or lot coverage of that multifamily structure. On the other hand, that's a design element, a building regulation. That's not to say under separate state law, you couldn't also regulate stormwater drainage generally and require, for example, any building permit applicant to submit a water drainage plan, right? That has no reference to what type of structure is going in. It's just that for any structure, any land disturbance, you want a stormwater drainage plan considered. I think that authority is clear and not subject to challenge. And you could, for example, say if you're disturbing land area of X square feet, then you need a water drainage plan, and the water drainage plan has to include stormwater retention devices according to the Maryland Design Manual or whatever is found appropriate.
Right.
Does that help, Madam President?
I still struggle with some of this.
Or was that too complicated? I can try to do better.
So the purpose of.
Wait, Marnie, we can't hear you too well.
The purpose of tonight is that there are 2 hearings coming up. One is a planning board hearing later this month. It's before our next council meeting. This was too complicated to try and do in a short amount of time. But there was also a county council hearing February 11th. So a goal for tonight would be to come up with a letter that individually the mayor and individual council members could sign if they chose to, that could be read by the mayor at the January 28th hearing. And then we can have a full discussion prior to the county council hearing about whether the town wants to take a position on the ZTA. One other thing I might add, I think most of you are familiar with Thrive Montgomery 2050, which is the county's effort at developing a general plan that has been in the works for more than 2 years. And it's currently being revised by the planning board and is expected to arrive at the county council in probably March or April. And as a major theme in this gigantic plan is missing middle housing and providing more housing through infill development. And it's envisioned that there might be a number of different mechanisms to do this, because sometimes people talk about the importance of very carefully selecting sites for infill housing so it really fits in with the neighborhood. And one way to do that is through master plans, rather than doing a one-size-fits-all zoning text amendment. So that's kind of the bigger context. So from the perspective of the town of Chevy Chase that's been leading this effort, and from others probably like us, it would be better to not have this ZTA go into effect, but instead to go back and have all of these issues developed through the rewrite of the general plan, Thrive Montgomery 2050. And with that, I'm happy to open this up to people's thoughts, reactions, questions, and so on.
I have a question, and I don't know if Marnie, if you're the right one or if our mayor is the right person, but why would Will Giwando have come up with this ZTA when we all know that the county planning board has been working on this for such a long time, and they've held hearings on it, and they're trying to bring in the communities and get feedback. What was the purpose of his doing this? I can't remember what meeting I was at, but I remember Park and Planning was not even a part of this ZTA proposal. They didn't even know it was coming down the pike. So why would he? Do you have any insights on that? Why he would do that? Jeffrey, have you talked with him at all?
Well, Marty, do you want to answer that?
No, Jeffrey, I think you should. You've met with him more often.
Okay, well, we met with him our council president and also the mayor of Chevy Chase and a council member. And we met with him after we had met with them. And honestly, the reason he introduced it is because it's a political calculation. He wants to own the issue. He's not really, he mainly sort of threw it out there, and he wants to get feedback to see where the wind is going on it. And he's very willing. He seemed very willing to work with us. He wants opportunities to engage. When we had the meeting with him, he's so interested in finding opportunities to engage with voters, with opinion leaders. And that is why. So I'm not really worried that it's going to pass in a form that is detrimental to us. Doesn't that sum it up, Madam President?
I think that's right. I should just add that this is kind of a tricky issue because during the Thrive Montgomery 2050 hearing, there were a number of people who testified who were very critical of single-family neighborhoods because they felt like they were exclusionary and not welcoming to people of differing backgrounds. And so how one puts out concerns about this is important. And so I guess that's why we struggle with the first sentence in this draft letter. But I mean, from our residents' perspective, I mean, I think many of our residents welcome people of all backgrounds. I don't know whether people are going to welcome, if the house next door to you gets torn down, having a duplex, courtyard apartments, or townhouses put in.
Right.
And part of what we've talked about in this letter is, and I think Ron strengthened it on this front, is the additional density issue. We're an old established neighborhood with an old sewer system and narrow streets without a lot of parking. I mean, I go down Cumberland some days with my dog and there is not a single place to park. A lot of those homes don't actually have driveways, I think. So there will be some density issues that come up with additional housing, even if it looks like it fits in.
Marnie, are you, what are you thinking in terms of enlightening? I know you've written your articles in the journal, but I also know that you haven't gotten a lot of feedback. What are you thinking is the best way to hear from the community on this?
You know, I know that the town of Chevy Chase has had some listening sessions. I mean, I haven't done a journal article specifically on the ZTA, which I plan to do tonight or tomorrow for this coming month's journal. But I'm very open to what are going to be the best ways to engage our residents. I don't want people to get upset and right away have a knee-jerk reaction saying, well, we don't want these kinds of structures in our town. So, you know, I don't know exactly what do others think about this?
I mean, I guess one thing I'm thinking about is, and I know we've talked about this in other situations in the past, like with respect to development in downtown Bethesda, but the thing that comes up to my mind whenever we talk about density are the resources like the schools and the public safety, like the fire department and the police department. And then, you know, I know that those are sort of more county, I mean, those aren't necessarily just Somerset issues, but whenever we talk about adding density, you know, I always want to hear, well, what's the plan for supporting the density? And if there is a plan, then great. But if, you know, if there's no plan, then, you know, then I always feel like you can't just sort of build the housing and then just expect the school systems, you know, sometimes they don't ever really catch up. And then you end up with portables, you know, after all of the work that the schools have done to try to manage this. Anyway, I'm not completely up to date on what the schools are doing, but that's sort of my first reaction on it. And I do think that there is sort of a risk with some of these county things that happen that people don't really pay that much attention to them until all of a sudden it's happening, and then people say, wait a minute, what's going on? And so I would say that if you're writing an article, I don't think you can be too dramatic. I think it's okay to be dramatic, because to some extent, if we're going to find out what our residents think, we're going to have to, we're going to have to treat this as something that they should pay attention to. So, I mean, those are just my thoughts, I guess. I'm not sure if I have a position on it. I was trying to look at that chart that they had attached to it that explained the differences between the current law and what they're proposing. And it does seem like, and I don't have it in front of me, but it does seem like one of the things that would change would be that the percentage of lot coverage would go up. So right there, we would have a change that would be significant enough for our residents, where I think people would want to know what was being proposed. So
During the Thrive Montgomery discussions, we did raise questions like affordability, how is this all going to get paid for?
Right.
What's going to happen with schools? They said they had talked to the Montgomery County Public Schools, but it did not sound like they had worked out a close partnership. They sounded DOT, the Montgomery County DOT. I mean, since they want to get people out of cars, would have to have a different role. It doesn't sound like they're on board for that either.
Yeah.
So
I think what our mayor said is this is very early in the process. Will Jawando is saying, this is a flyer to kind of state his position so that he can lead on it going forward. And the question is there going to be strong pressure further down the line to open up neighborhoods like ourselves to other than just single family dwelling? And what do we do then, anticipating that now? That's where I am. And do we develop a fallback position, or do we do all out resistance to try to stop it? That's really the directions we should be thinking about now.
Yeah. The other thing I would want to say before I forget is just that I think, and I know Ron's really got his finger on this, but I think it would really help us to understand, sort of almost in a chart form, what can we continue to regulate and what would we not be allowed to regulate if this went forward as proposed. Maybe it's just an exercise at this point. Maybe this is a flyer and maybe we don't need to worry too much. I mean, that's kind of what I hear from Jeffrey. But whenever we look at something like this, it would be helpful for me at least to have a frame to put over it that says, we're still allowed to regulate these things within the town of Somerset, but these other things would no longer be, allowed to be limited, just so that we could interpret it as a change for how things actually happen in Somerset. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would appreciate that. I might also mention, and I know hardly anything about this, but out in Denver where our daughter lives, they've, on lots that had single family homes, they've turned them into duplexes. And what happens, that doesn't create middle housing at all. It creates two $1 million
Double density.
townhouses. It's certainly not more affordable housing, at least out in Denver. I don't know if it would be here, but not out there.
Yeah, so to that point, yesterday I read through the 167-page Thrive Montgomery plan.
What if
And-
I've read it.
It only took you one day.
Yes, and I think your public outreach should include citation to this report so everybody can take a look at it, because there are some quotes in there that are very surprising. So to Franny's point, of course, a question everyone has is, how can you create affordable housing in this area where land values are very high? Aren't you just going to be creating more density with unaffordable prices?
Right.
But if you read through the plan, you see that the plan basically is to eliminate single-family zoning near transit centers, to remove the single family houses and replace them with smart growth. Because, here's one quote. The county needs housing growth in transit accessible locations. Predominantly single family detached houses currently line these transit corridors, limited by zoning that only allows only this type of housing. Low to moderate density increases would allow the introduction of more housing types near transit to serve a mix of incomes and housing types. And then there's photographs, drawings in the plan where they show, the streets would no longer have single family homes, but, commercial uses on the first floor, condos on the second floor. And that's the general vision for the transit corridors, so that everyone living there can walk to wherever they want to within a 15-minute time period to go to the grocery store, go to entertainment, etc. So the chart that Matt has on the screen is perfectly timed. Right now, the ZTA would not alter the existing setbacks and similar regulations that apply to single family structures, but that's right now.
Right.
The Thrive Montgomery plan reflects that eventually the county wants the entire transit center area to be recomposed and to, eliminate the single family neighborhoods in those areas.
Ron, would they buy like when someone puts how would they do that?
Oh,
Buy
yeah.
the parcels? I mean,
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for reining me back in, Barbara, because that's where I started and then I left that bit out. The plan says that as part of the planning process, they're going to create a housing functional master plan and create an affordable housing ombudsman to study how can we incentivize affordable housing development in these areas. So, they recognize we're going to have to make it financially viable and attractive to developers to build this type of housing. So, whether it be tax incentives or the like, that's something they're going to study to figure out how they can actually make it affordable.
So this kind of brings me back to my question, which is within that, Ron, what are we still allowed to regulate? For instance, would we be allowed to say, in the town of Somerset, you may not take down, a tree or a couple of trees in order to build this, in other words, what are we allowed to keep in terms of our regulatory framework in order to prevent the increased lot coverage and the stormwater issues that we anticipate coming from this proposed change? What is there, or I guess the question is there anything that you can see that we would still be able to retain in terms of?
Yeah, you'd still be able to regulate trees and tree removals. You'd still be able to regulate or require water drainage plans as discussed previously. But if the argument succeeds that you're only able to regulate single family structures, then you would not be able to regulate the
Right.
size and location.
I understand that, yeah. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of the goals of our own legislation if you could only apply them to structures that were single family homes as opposed to structures that had two families. I mean,
Right. And of course,
so I agree with you.
I probably should have said too, you can always go back to the state legislature and ask them to clarify the state law and to expressly say residential structures instead of single family structures.
Yeah. And then
Or ask the county council to write into the ZTA that an applicant for a duplex or triplex or quad must satisfy the building regulations of the locality applicable to single family structures, so that all structures are treated the same.
I think from a strategy standpoint, I think you all know the town of Chevy Chase has been taking the lead on gathering people together to talk about this, not only first Thrive Montgomery and now this ZTA. From our perspective, it would be much better to work through these kinds of issues through Thrive Montgomery. But I don't think we have as much time. I don't think we have that much time because the planning department and board are going through and rewriting the Thrive Montgomery based on the comments they had at their November hearing. And they're not going to give anybody a chance to look at the revised plan. That's my understanding. They've been having work sessions where they're talking about the issues, but they're not going to have another big hearing where people get to comment on the revision to the plan that they originally presented. So this is going to be dropped on the county council. Thrive Montgomery is going to be dropped on the county council probably in April. And they will take a position during 2021 because I don't know if it's by law, Ron, that they do not vote on land use issues in an election year, which is 2022.
I'm not aware if that's a law.
Right. Everyone says that they're
That's a
going to deal.
political calculation.
Everyone says they're going to deal with it in 2021. So
Bernie, what does that you mean that they're gonna? What are you saying? They're gonna vote on it in
they
20?
will adopt a version of Thrive Montgomery during this calendar year.
It's
It-
just like
it-
the
it-
same,
I had, oh,
It's-
sorry, Mr. Mayor.
same mentality why they don't want to pass a tax increase in an election year. There's no law about it.
It is going to go through in much the form of the 160. I also read the report, and Ron, I didn't read it in a single day, I will say. But the message is very clear in it that we've got to get people out of their cars. I mean, what they're saying is if we continue in our current pattern of single family homes, there is no space to put people. That is it. And the only way we can actually grow is by having denser housing. That's it. And where we want people to grow the most is where people use the cars the least because there are too many cars. That's all extremely strong arguments. And the county is almost going to go with it, but it affects us dramatically.
Rob,
Yes, in fact,
Yeah.
I think there may even be a few lots in Somerset that are within half a mile of the Friendship Heights Metro.
well, there are
but-
2 vacant homes by me that are within a half a mile, and the homes are vacant.
Oh dear.
So if you have these meetings, your meetings with, it would just be so interesting to me to hear what how people in the town might react. And since you have these regular meetings with folks in town, would you be willing to bring up this topic? Because as we all know, like at the leaf blower forum, we got, I think it was, aside from the environment committee and all of us,
Didn't get a lot of
there
comments.
were
No.
maybe 2 or 3 outsiders. That was it. So
No, I
I,
mean, I could certainly do it, and Jeffrey is also at my forum usually, and I can make it. It's not going to be in next week's, but I can do it next month. I can do it, and this issue is not going that urgent. It's going to happen over years. But what I'm saying is that we need to think about it and develop a plan to respond to it. And as I said, we can go one of 2 ways. One is we oppose it every step of the way, and I don't think we should oppose it every step of the way myself. The other is we have a fallback plan. What does our fallback plan look like? That's
I would just be interested in hearing from the community because I too,
no,
see-
that's fine. And yes, I can do that. I mean, absolutely, I will do it.
that'd be great.
But
Thank
that's sort of why I was asking if we could try at all times to apply the town of Somerset filter to whatever's being proposed, because I think what people
you.
will to do in terms of regulating. So for that
Is Franny freezing for you guys?
Yes.
hard
The
people.
voice, there we go.
Franny, you're freezing. You're frozen.
Your image is frozen on the
unstable.
screen.
Sorry. I can get rid of my video. Let me try that. Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay. So all I was saying is that I just think before presenting this package of ideas to people in the town, you know, at every opportunity that you have, it would be important to be able to say, how does this directly affect Somerset in terms of what we still can regulate and we still can sort of quote unquote control to the extent we want to. But if you don't have that answer, then it's just going to be like, you know, the county's proposing to do this. And then people will say, well, what does that mean for Somerset?
I agree.
And, you know, because we're different as a municipality, there may in fact still be some things that we might have a different level of control over than Chevy Chase West, for instance. So I think it's just still important to be able to answer that in conjunction with these conversations. So
If, Franny, to that point, one thing that might be helpful for you and that we can make maybe available to residents and is something that Councilmember Giwando asked for in our meeting is I'm working on basically filling out another column in that chart that I had up before that shows what Somerset's is now as well. So you would see, you know, how does that affect regular county regulations? How does that affect Somerset County regulations?
That's
yeah,
terrific.
that's exactly what I had in mind.
That's terrific. Thank you.
This is a big topic which we will, I think, continue to discuss. Do you feel like you want to, any of you want to say something from at the hearing on the 28th of this month?
Not me.
No, I don't
Okay.
think I'm up for that.
Okay,
I mean, I think the most compelling argument you might make is Thrive Montgomery itself says one of the recommended actions is to do what zoning text amendment 2007 does. But that recommendation's not yet been adopted. So the ZTA jumps the gun and attempts to implement a recommendation in Thrive Montgomery before the Thrive Montgomery planning has finished.
Right.
Thrive
That's-
Montgomery
that's-
also has an option, rather than doing an overall zoning text amendment, using master plans as a way to target missing middle housing. So I'm not sure we want to jump to saying, well, let's just wait till it's adopted in Thrive 2050. What do you think, Ron?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, the Thrive Montgomery plan says, as you pointed out, that the recommendations contained therein are in the general plan, the highest level planning document. And then that is supposed to be implemented through review of the focused, and there's a specific phrase they use, like narrowly tailored or something to that effect, master plans. So I mean, the names are a bit odd. You know, one might think the master plan is the highest level plan, but you know, master plans cover certain areas. And currently, the master plan for the town of Somerset and surrounding areas says, you know, it was written in 1990, that the single family homes and neighborhoods are well established and should remain as is.
Hmm.
And so, you know, if Thrive Montgomery is adopted, then the Chevy Chase master plan needs to be reviewed and amended as necessary. And then after that, the zoning map and zoning code should be amended to follow all of the, you know, higher level policy decisions. But, you know, the zoning text wants to skip all those steps. And
Yeah.
the Thrive Montgomery plan says, you know, we recognize that these recommendations cannot be implemented in a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the zoning text amendment is doing.
Ron, does the,
So back to Marnie's point, sorry, Franny, real quick.
yeah,
So, you know, I agree with Franny, we don't want to, I'm sorry, I agree with Marnie that we don't want to
Yeah.
concede that we'll just wait, but we should at least say, you know, the zoning text amendment jumps the gun and shouldn't be adopted. And then in the interim, you figure out as a town with your residents, is this something we like or don't like?
Could we
Right.
also say that it's not in the spirit of the Thrive Montgomery thing because it is one size fits all, and Thrive Montgomery is saying that's not the approach they're adopting.
Yeah.
Right. Ron, I was just.
We don't know in
curious-
the end
Yeah.
whether they will adopt, what they're going to adopt in Thrive Montgomery.
Well,
True.
as currently expressed in the draft.
This may be too soon to worry about, but I'm just curious to know whether, Robin and others were talking about the infrastructure in town for the sewer system the other night. And, are those kinds of things addressed in this kind of proposal or in the Thrive Montgomery language? I mean, in addition to some of the sort of human resources I was mentioning before, it just seems to me that, if we can't even manage the water that is overflowing in our town with our existing systems, how does this work? I mean, is the idea that there's going to be money spent on the infrastructure in this down county area in order to support the added
Well,
density?
it is appropriate criticism of, and Marnie has this in her draft letter to some degree, of Will Jawando's motion, but Thrive Montgomery, no, because what they're doing is giving guidance to the whole county. So they're saying we need infrastructure in order for this to happen, is part of their overall
Yeah.
message. But yeah, with Will Jawanda rushing it, no, we don't have
Right.
the infrastructure to support the kind of housing that he's talking about at the moment.
Right. Okay. I
Yeah,
think that's important.
I agree. And then, when you move down again from the general plan to the master plans, then when the master plans are developed, the applicable county agencies would have the opportunity to weigh in
Right.
as to whether the proposed development
Yeah.
can be safe with respect to fire safety and adequacy of public facilities and all that.
I don't know. For some reason, I'm also just thinking about all the, tremendous effort that went into, fixing the creek in the woods and, how that had been damaged by lack of attention to the sewer systems and, how much money and effort and time, not to mention trees, of course, had to go into that. And that's just a small section of our town and maybe a small priority. I think there are all these different things. And I think the problem is that when you talk about whether or not you're in favor of adding housing, it becomes a very emotional and sort of has the risk of becoming a very judgmental issue. And I think, it would be great if we could figure out a way to frame any objections we have to this to link them clearly to the top line concerns that we're hearing from the residents in town that they have about the canopy and the creek and flooding and other important priorities. And so I don't know how to manage it. I think that's a difficult needle to thread, but I think most people in town are sympathetic to the ideas, but then when you look at how much actual land we have here, there's not a lot.
Well, there's talk in the Thrive Montgomery and in the Jawano thing, I think, about assembling lots. So if you had two homes that were willing to, and where both owners were willing to sell, you could assemble larger parcels.
Mhm. Well, I mean, maybe you get there if you do that. I mean, maybe that's a thoughtful development process that ends up with something that works. Maybe you end up with a better drainage system or something like that. But I think that sounds like the exception rather than the rule.
During the earlier discussions, we posed questions like, well, how will infrastructure be financed? Additional infrastructure
Right.
be financed? And there really were not answers for that at all, as far as I'm concerned. And there's not a recognition of the sluggish. They say they understand growth in Montgomery County is sluggish, and they don't seem to really link that to, well, that's going to make it hard for us to invest in schools and in sewers and all that kind of thing. Well, there's still a lot we can talk about here, and there are opportunities outside of tonight for people to spend more time on this.
So
But
Marty,
I guess
what
the question
are you
is,
thinking? You're gonna write an article and then what do you feel is our best next step?
well, we're gonna, at the February meeting, we would propose that we discuss what we want to have as testimony for the county council as a town position. So we could have a fairly robust discussion at the next council meeting.
But that would be before we've heard from the community on it, right?
Well, when you say the next council meeting, which council meeting are you talking about, Marnie?
It has to be February because the hearing is February 11th.
Then that will be before the community has a chance to weigh in, yeah.
Well, the question is, I mean, I'm happy to circulate an article, write something, circulate an article and see if people think it will engage people in the community. I mean, sometimes people do write.
Hmm.
I think that would be great. Thank you.
Well, in terms of my goal for tonight, it sounds like most of the council is not interested in signing on for anything for the January 28th hearing. Is that correct? I am going to, Jeffrey's going to probably go and read something. Is that correct, Jeffrey?
I had to unmute. I think what I'm gonna do, which I think that you're gonna do too, I think probably there'll be something joint with me and Mayor Baskier.
They're going to have a lot more detail, I think. I mean, we were talking about just a
Well,
short letter.
We
There's some-
can, we can talk about it.
They're working on a letter. They were working on it last night and they're
We-
working on it right now.
Community is that?
Town of Chevy
Chevy
Chase on
Chase.
behalf of the coalition.
Thank
They
you.
have a much more dire circumstance
Well,
because
you and I as individuals can go along, I think that from the beginning, you and I have kind of pledged to work with her. So for some reason, they have a rule there, which I don't understand, that she can, as an individual elected official, have a position. But you and I can, any council member here, we don't have any kind of rule. I mean, I think that's a First Amendment issue. I don't know what, but anyway, so I think that what I was planning to do is just move forward with the original ideas that she had about it, We don't have that much. I just think our presence with some of the issues that I think the majority of our council agrees with, we can talk about. We only get a few minutes.
right. Well, the 19th, there's a meeting in East Bethesda. The town of Chevy Chase has been working with other communities with a long list of questions that the East Bethesda community is going to ask Jawando.
I mean, you've really been the leader on this. And so I think that those original issues that you brought up, because you're more experienced in this area than anybody on the Chevy Chase Council. And I think that Mayor Baskier was looking to you for guidance. So I think that, well, that's what I think. So I think we can talk about those original objections, concerns that you brought up, and that's what we can do.
I do have one comment on the letter, on the comments, on the letter, I guess it's the second sentence of the second paragraph, that our town is more than 100 years old and a home to individuals of every race, religion, and economic circumstance. I'm a little uncomfortable with economic circumstance because I don't feel that we are a community of individuals of every single.
What happened was I had a totally different sentence, but I got comments from both Ron and Jeffrey. And when I melded them, I think the sentence didn't work out very well. Ron did the first part, Jeffrey did the second part. So I'm happy to put something else in there.
What's your original
The idea is that my idea was that we are a welcoming community to everyone. It has nothing to do with whether they own a house or not. It just has to do with, because I thought it was important that we address the fact that we're not trying to be an exclusive community like we are now. That many people are uncomfortable with that. So that I wanted it to be that our objections are purely quality of life and not the type of people.
Well, we don't have any role in who buys a house in Somerset at all. I mean,
That is
Yes,
what
I'm-
I'm talking about. I was talking about that we are a welcoming community. It has nothing to do with buying or renting a house here.
oh, okay.
It's the type of people that that are our constituents. Because a lot of people view these, we're basically a bunch of NIMBYs. And a lot of people view that, view that with not understanding where we're coming from and think that is a excuse for trying to exclude people
I see.
of different backgrounds.
What if you just said a variety or a wide variety? Would that,
Well, I think that the agenda of the president you're getting a little behind, and I think that she had suggested that these kind of things can be discussed later by the council.
But we're not allowed to talk about things together.
Well, we can do it on one, but I have a question. I mean, Barbara, you've already said you don't want to sign on, so it doesn't really matter.
No, I didn't say that at all. I'd
I
like
thought
to
you did.
sign on. No, I would like to sign on.
Oh, okay. So how many people would be interested in signing on if we could get a letter we could agree on? I'm going to. Okay, so everybody. Okay. So maybe the next thing to do is for everybody, I don't think there's time to go through all the comments from each of you, but if you want to send me comments, I will work on coming up with a new version. We have time. The hearing's not till the 28th.
But also remember that if you come up with something and then later on you have additional comments, the record will be open. So don't feel pressure to be under this time constraint. It's just they're having a hearing, but the record is open, and those planning board members will be interested in views after the 28th. And anybody individually, you're all leaders in the community. Your individual views on this carry a lot of weight. So go for it.
Questions? Okay, we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is basically Ron's. As you know, we did pass something about the process for an ordinance. And this is kind of like a companion piece about how the council would do resolutions. So I guess the question in front of you is, do you want to have in place a policy for resolutions? Do you think it's important? And if so, are you comfortable with what Ron has prepared?
yes.
I think it's useful for new council members particularly, and so I think it is a good thing, yeah. And I'm happy with what's been prepared.
Anybody else? Because if that's the consensus, then this would go on the February agenda.
I just have one question. Under number 2, and I guess this is for Ron. Is it under 2? Is it 2.2? At least
Okay.
3 members of the council may direct the town attorney to draft a resolution in advance of the presentation of the issue in order to aid the discussion. Is that standard language, Ron?
It's a standard approach that I recommend to my clients and that I follow in the absence of a written policy. Because in order to keep my costs down, I generally only take orders, for lack of a better term, from the mayor and manager. But then, because the council, controls the budget and whatnot, and if there's ever an instance where the mayor and manager are at odds with the council, then the council should have a means to get things done as well. And so then, if they have a majority, then they should be able to do so. So that's why I say 3 there.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
My only thing is people are going to have to be careful about whether they actually introduce a resolution or not, because it seems like an introduction as a formal item makes it a 2-meeting process.
Doesn't it have to go through the agenda process to begin with? So it's
Frankly-
already filtered. I would like to see it be a one meeting process.
I mean,
So,
that
yeah,
all
this,
in there.
sorry.
It was that the 1 meeting version is in there. You can be 1 meeting.
If you
So
make a mistake and you formally introduce it, then you're at 2 meetings.
Yeah,
right?
if you make a mistake, it's 2 meetings, but come on, you don't have to,
Well, is there any other, are there any other comments? If not, Matt, could you put this on the February agenda?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so as the mayor noted, as a matter of best practice and transparency, many resolutions you will carry over for 2 meetings to get public comment. And then there'll be other resolutions that are less controversial, like recognition statements and the like, that you might just do in 1 meeting. So this policy gives you the option to choose what's appropriate under the circumstances.
wouldn't we be using resolutions for things like the 2 letters that we approved during our council meeting tonight? Wouldn't that be a better approach?
I'm sorry, Franny, could you say again?
Well, I guess I was just thinking when we approved sending out the 2 letters that we had drafted tonight,
Mhm.
it seemed like sometimes we resolve to send out letters. And maybe we just need to use that language when we make our motions rather than actually having to worry about having a resolution drafted. But we could try to be more conscious about saying, the council resolves to send out this letter, so that it would be clear that we're not legislating, but we're resolving.
Yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
good
I
point.
just think that would be helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. When the council's taking action, it's deciding to do something, it's resolving to do something, and
Yeah,
the resolution doesn't always have to be in writing. It can just be a
Right.
verbal.
but
motion.
that way, if you needed to, for some reason, ratify something, that you would be able to go back and then say, we ratify the council's resolution, to do that. But I just think, like, with these letters, that was kind of why I wasn't sure whether we needed to vote to send, for instance, the condolence letter, because I wasn't sure that it was in fact a matter of policy. But if we treat it as such, then we would want to say that we're resolving to send that letter. It's sort of a fine point. I don't know if it, maybe we don't get it right every time, but it seems like it could help us with our just separating our actions into,
Yeah, I think your point is clear.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're acting as individuals and we all sign it as individuals. Sometimes we're acting as a council, in which case.
Right, exactly. So if we're taking an action on behalf of the council, I think it would be appropriate to say when we do it, to use those words. So I don't know, it doesn't need to change what we're looking at tonight necessarily.
Are we ready to move on? Okay, well, the next item is the
Marnie, I
personnel.
can't, hard to hear you again.
The next item is the personnel manual, and the reason this has come to our attention is that at the last time we looked at the personnel manual, which is close to 10 years ago, we continued the practice the town had of having different hours for our public works staff and our office staff. And that actually caused us some problems going forward. And with Enrique planning to retire, it seemed like this was an opportunity to look at whether or not we wanted to line up everybody with the same weekly hours for being a full-time staff person. So that triggered whether we should look at the personnel manual. I actually read through it, and that's not the only change that needs to get made. And in addition, Ron was not our town attorney at the time this was developed, and state laws may have changed, and federal laws may have changed. So there may be some other issues that would need to be resolved to really bring the personnel manual up to standard. So I guess my first question is, are folks comfortable looking at the idea of having the same full-time hours no matter what the employee's job classification is? Same number of hours for full-time employment.
I mean, the only concern I had is that the 35 hours is for physical labor, and that it is more common in contracts for physical labor that you have a 35-hour work week rather than a 40-hour work week. And I'm not sure if there's a law behind that or that just is practice. That's where I was.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The only reaction I had to it was that I just have seen how difficult it has been for first Rich and then Matt to hire people. And I just my first thought was that I would want Matt to have as much flexibility as he needed in order to bring people on. I'm not sure if what I'm saying really conflicts with the proposal or not, but if Matt found somebody who, fit all of our qualifications and they wanted to be a full-time employee for 35 hours, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying it just seems to me that we're sort of tying Matt's hands a little bit and making it hard for him to find people to come work for the town. But I know the reasons why we ran into trouble last time. I remember that. And so I understand the goal of trying to streamline it. But, maybe the answer is if he finds somebody who has, sort of that set of facts, maybe he comes to the town council and asks for permission to create sort of a different employment contract or something. I mean, maybe there's a way to get around it if that happened, but.
Well, maybe.
This also raised one other challenge with the current system. And Matt, you mentioned something about annual leave, et cetera. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, because the town's personnel manual currently has a leave policy that is partially based on length of service to the town, but the amount of hours that you accrue is the same whether you work 40 or 35 hours a week. So, if I'm earning 7 hours of leave per pay period, so per 2 hours, that's sort of a different perk than if a 35-hour per week person was earning set. And actually, because our maintenance crew has served in Somerset for so long, all of them earn the maximum amount of accrued time off. And it just so happens that what ends up happening is they could theoretically all take off one day every pay period and still add accrued time off. Which I don't know if that's, I don't know that that is the way it's intended to be designed or not.
Just makes it hard for us to recruit new people. I mean, God forbid if Matt decided to leave us, you know, how do we prepare an attractive package if we, you know, essentially have all of his employees getting way more vacation time than he does? I don't know. Maybe that's not a problem.
Well, I mean, I personally don't have an issue necessarily with, certainly with, you know, getting additional benefits after a certain length of service. And it hasn't really presented itself as an issue other than the you know, the going on 2 years that I've been here, all of the maintenance guys have maxed out the hours that they accrue every year. And Enrique, in some instances, has had to give up annual leave hours. And so it's just something that I need to think about, that if it's not a benefit that he's actually able to use, then it's not really much of a benefit.
We would also,
yeah.
yeah. I know there are other changes that need to be made in the personnel manual because they're just, you know, the town isn't the same way it was in 2011. I guess the question is, who should attempt to make suggestions for changes in the personnel manual? It doesn't sound like everybody thinks necessarily moving from 35 to 40 hours is the right thing, but we ought to maybe look at that and what the implications are. We certainly would have to pay our staff more if we move them to 40 hours a week. There are other changes that need to get made to the manual, and we would need Ron to look at to see whether it's really consistent with current law. What's the process that the town should use to do this? Barbara and I did the revisions the last time around with our town attorney, but there's no longer an ad hoc personnel committee. So I'm not sure what the thinking is by maybe Jeffrey and Matt about how the revisions to the personnel manual could best be done. What involvement, if any, the council should have.
I mean, I hate to say it because it's more work, but Jeffrey and Matt should have first crack at it because they're the
I agree with that.
and they're the people who deal with the personnel.
Well, we can work with Ron. We can look at it and then give it to Ron, and then it can come to a work session, and then you all can, because some of the stuff is just boilerplate and some of it is policy things that it's going to be up to the council to decide based on Somerset. And
I think I would also want you to make a
I think that Ron will be able to delineate the best practices from the things that need a subjective decision. And then, you know, Matt, as the manager, can give his input based on, you know, his professional training, because that's why we have him. So that's what I would suggest. We can draft something, give it to Ron, and then the council president can put it on a future, you know, whatever work session sheet.
I think there's some, given that we're going to be in the hiring process, I think there's some urgency in trying to reach, to develop a new manual. I would suggest we have something for the next work session in mid-February.
That's not a problem.
Matt, I will send you all the things I noticed as I read through the personnel manual. You probably send them too, but I can send you the things I think we need to take a look at.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Anything else anybody wants to say about this topic? If not,
Sorry, I'll just, one thing to think about is, this happens in the federal government, when you've got too much leave, you can donate it to others if, and that is something that we might want to write into our code.
Thanks,
Well,
yeah.
Well, what I would suggest is if any council member has a specific issue, to just email Matt and then we can fold that into the proposal.
thank you. The next item is the Realtor letter. You should have a something that was drafted by Doug, I believe, and a memo from Phyllis, as well as 2 disclosure statements. So
Just tell me if it's helpful to have it pulled up for you, and if you want me to switch between the documents or what one you want up.
I think Phyllis raised some concerns about going ahead with a letter like this. And whether people have had a chance
Well,
to.
could you, as a former Realtor, could you advise us on what were her concerns?
Sure. So I think generally speaking, her concern was that there's already some regulations related to the sale of property, and that sort of get to who is responsible for informing about local laws, things like that. I also thought that I think she was also concerned a little bit about if hypothetically, if a sale fell through because all of a sudden a real estate agent was handing something over to to a prospective buyer, that could potentially get the town in trouble.
Well, that's why the town attorney, remember, Phyllis is, she is coming from the real estate industry, and our duty is to the public, not to, so I think that we should make sure, the point of this is that, one of the main points of this is that when a prospective purchaser comes to an open house in Somerset, that at that open house or whenever they're interested in the property, that they are made aware of what is different in Somerset than is in outside of, what's different about.
Yeah, I think Phyllis.
And so worried about a contract falling through, we're not worried about that.
Okay.
We're worried about getting information to the public so that when they decide to purchase, that they have all the information and not worried about.
Well, one of the things though was that she, if a real estate agent doesn't share this, because she basically says it's not the real estate agent's responsibility either. So they might find, well, I'm not going to potentially scare people away, so I'm just not going to do it. That's really the responsibility of the seller.
This is a document that needs to be reviewed by the town attorney, that to make sure that it's the information that the council wants. We're not concerned about the liabilities of a realtor or the point of this is it's an information thing that is public information. If she doesn't want to, if she thinks that disclosing it could be a problem for a real estate agent who's making money, that's not our problem.
Yeah, I think it was sort of an issue that maybe was brought up at the last time this was discussed, that I think that she felt it wasn't effective, and maybe it was coming from the perspective of a real estate agent, that it wasn't fair
And it-
that
yeah.
we were targeting transactions that went through a real estate
We
agent when
don't have any.
some do not. And ultimately, the things that we're asking are really the responsibility of the seller to provide to the new buyer, not the real estate agent.
But
Yeah.
our duty is to the public. Some of our public are purchasers and some of our duty is to sellers.
I would like to, I would just like to say that I continue to be against sending this letter out. And I know that I'm in the minority on this, but I feel like there's an opportunity for only sending it selectively to people who have the for sale sign up. I think that already, just from the beginning creates an imbalance in terms of how this is handled. I think that all of the information that's in our draft letter is available to the public through multiple sources, and that realtors for the buyers and realtors for the sellers who are educated about the town of Somerset already know that the town of Somerset has its own rules and regulations. And I think that the idea that our staff is going to go around and put a letter into a mailbox that says, we see that you have a for sale sign up, I think it's a terrible idea. So I understand the impulse to try to educate people with the goal of trying to have better outcomes at our town council meetings, but I do not think that this letter is a good idea. So I know, like I said, I know you guys don't agree with me on this, but a lot of Phyllis's reasons kind of line up with my reasons on this, and I'm not in favor of this.
And following up on what Franny just said, I happen to get Redfin alerts when homes in Somerset, I've not happened to, I signed up to get Redfin alerts when homes in Somerset go on the market. And a house on Uppingham just sold last month, and there was not a sign, nothing about a realtor. No one, I can't imagine any of you know unless you happen to get the Redfin alerts as well. And so it would be very, it would be very selective, as Franny was saying, as to who would get the letter and who would not get the letter. It would, and I think that, and it would also be, Phyllis is someone who's not defending her, but she's in the neighborhood, so she'll try and go along with it. We've had most of the homes now are being sold by brand new realtors who they don't know Somerset. They're not a part of the community. And I don't think there's any way to be sure that they're going to do anything with the letter. And for that reason alone, I'm sort of feeling that maybe we should not send it out either.
If we send it out, I think it should go, actually, believe it or not, to all owners in town. I mean, all owners in town. And the point is that, as Barbara is saying, some sales are virtually private. It's the builder is approaching the owner, and the owner agrees to the builder's terms, and it's gone. It's sold. That's that. So having the owners aware of these things, even when they're not thinking about selling, is probably about the only way it's going to be useful, because at times they're not thinking about selling when the builder puts in an offer.
In which
So
case, we might as well just have it be a regular feature in our journal. As a reminder, if you're thinking about selling your house, here's some information that could be useful to you, and just put it in a box, put it in, the journal, a couple times a year, and put a link into the website. And honestly, I think if you're trying to educate the people in the town about this stuff, which first of all, I don't know if I agree is necessary, but anyway, if you want to, I think it's better to do it in a way that goes out in a newsletter and not in a letter that shows up in somebody's house that says, we see you've got a for sale sign. I mean, that feels very creepy to me.
No, we don't do
that
that.
we've got, somebody driving around town and looking for signs. I don't like that approach, in addition to my other concerns about the letter. So
Well, either a letter to all owners, or something in the journal, but it should repeat in the journal. It should be.
yeah, I get that. I mean, I think that's fine. We do that whenever whenever we do the taxes, every year we have a box that says, don't forget, when you do your taxes, you have to put in the name of the town of Somerset. And that's the kind of thing we could make a point of doing, before the sort of real estate season fires up. We could say, I don't know, in February or something, just say, if you're thinking about putting your house on the market, here's some reminders, and that, becomes much less of a burden on any one person, whether it's a buyer or a seller or a realtor or anything.
I'm good with that.
Is there anything you want to add?
I mean, I don't know if that's a question for me or not, but
I was asking what Steve hadn't had a chance to
I
talk.
can't see everybody's faces. Here we go. Okay, there we go.
Yes, thank you. I just wonder if we can't just post it on our website. So we're going to have what used to be called the welcome letter, which is sort of informal information oriented more towards potential buyers, potential people who might be moving into Somerset. And this could be a reference that's perhaps oriented more towards real estate agents.
Well, it sounds like based on the conversation here, I think this letter was initially generated by the office as maybe something that would be helpful. But it sounds as though on reflection, council members think that probably this isn't our best route, although we appreciate having had the opportunity to talk about it.
And it may be duplicative now, to Steve's point, with the welcome page on the website. That might be serving the purpose that this was originally intended to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Close this item out. So actually, we're back on our schedule again. So the last item is there anything else we want to talk about based on the gas-powered blower hearing to discuss about the legislation?
I think we should probably talk about it. I mean, it's been a while since we've had sort of a full conversation about it. We didn't have an opportunity to talk at our last, or we did have an opportunity, but we didn't talk about it at our council meeting. And I know that Steve mentioned to me that he was hoping we could come up with a compromise sort of timetable so we could get something passed soon. And I think it'd be worth talking about it tonight. I don't want to keep ignoring this and having it be something that builds up into something weird, especially since we're kind of all trying to get to the same point of figuring out how to do this. And I think everybody at this point has heard the educational materials that Barton has provided and that Steve has summarized for us, everything, and understands that there's currently a health concern for workers in our town, and perhaps less so a health risk, but certainly a strong degree of annoyance from the neighborhood about the noise. And so I do think we should talk about it tonight, and we should try to figure out how we can address all of these concerns and try to also balance our concerns for speed of implementation. I mean, we haven't yet had a chance to learn from the implementation from the other communities that have been ahead of us. So, even though they've adopted legislation and, have a looming, time where things are going to change, we haven't had a chance to see how things actually work. And, we also haven't had a chance to hear from landscapers, 6 months from now of how is it actually going and how does the pandemic affect things. So I guess, at the risk of sort of blowing up our our conversation. I think it's worth talking about, trying to figure out what the next step is, because I you know, I don't want this to drag on anymore, and I don't think Steve does either. So that's my point.
Thank you very much, Franny. Can I address some of those thoughts and maybe move the conversation along? Okay. So I'm very glad that as a council, we're sort of unanimously in agreement that there is an issue with gas-powered leaf blowers, and we want to take action on it. I mean, I think that that's a very important step, and it's good that we're in consensus. So now it's really a question of timeline, but I think it's really broader than timeline. We're really talking about implementation. How are we going to do this in a way that gets us to where we want to be, which is, you know, compliance with a ban on gas-powered leaf blowers, but to do so in a way that is as smooth and as seamless as possible for residents and landscapers, and also minimizes any special or particular impact on small minority-owned businesses. And I will share or agree that those are very, very valid, very important considerations that we should be thinking about. I think that we actually have a fair bit of time to work with. I know it sounds dramatic, January of 2022, that's less than a year away, but realistically, the leaf blowing season starts in, I don't know, maybe late September. So we're really talking about, say, a year and a half or a year and 9 months from now. And something that, and this is probably my fault, I didn't really go into the community outreach and landscaper education program that's envisioned by the Environment Committee. We just sort of jumped into the ban and trying to explain why we needed to have a ban. But this is something that I've discussed at length with Barton, and he has discussed with the Environment Committee. The vision is to bring in an outside consultant with knowledge of some of the issues of gas-powered leaf blowers, but also able to produce a bilingual pamphlet, and somebody who can help us craft an effective and sensitive transition program. The individual that, or the group we're thinking about is the, what is it? Good Grounds Cooperative. I didn't get that quite right. Kelly's group. The individual we have.
Groundsmith, yeah.
Groundsmith, thank you. I just drew a blank on that. You know, she's familiar with the issues from both the environmental issues with gas-powered leaf blowers, and also with the small minority-owned business perspective. And the idea is that as we approach, you know, she would help orchestrate help organize some town forums to help us get the word out about the date and the transition. She would help us identify who are all of the landscapers in the town. She'd probably have to put in a little bit of legwork walking around the town at the beginning of the next season to identify these folks. She'd be reaching out and talking to them. And I think we can be flexible. Hopefully the council can be flexible in how we support this transition. You know, for example, the original petition mentioned a Cash for Clunkers program. That seemed like a good idea at the time, but maybe that's actually not what would be effective for these businesses, or most effective these businesses. Maybe they would prefer to have ready acceptance by the community of plug-in leaf blowers. Plug-in leaf blowers are a lot less expensive and can still be very powerful, and we have small lots. Maybe that would be a good solution that would require more community outreach, so that residents would be comfortable having landscapers plug something in while they're doing the work. Or maybe we offer some sort of a no cost or low cost rental program with electric leaf blowers for landscapers to use. And those are just a couple of ideas off the top of my head. I would expect that Kelly would develop some more ideas, options, and help us, the council, identify the pros and cons. And then we can fine tune exactly how we implement this and how we support it. But I think we need to have a date that transitions us into using electric leaf blowers sometime prior to the 2023 season. So we can go through, sometime prior to this 2021, 22. Right.
So Steve, can I just ask you, when one of the things that always crosses my mind when I think about this stuff is a little bit tied back to what Kelly said at one of her community meetings, which is, and I appreciate and I understand your point about education, and certainly I have been educated in the process, and I appreciate that. I worry a little bit that essentially, focusing too heavily on education sort of runs the risk of being a little paternalistic. And that's not actually my top line concern on this, to be honest. My concern more is literally with respect to timing. If we could talk about a situation where we did not fine anybody for the first year, then that would make me more comfortable. That there's no point in writing legislation that's in place where you sort of agree not to implement it or enforce it for a year. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, I think the people who have been writing the letters already know all of the risks and all of the good reasons to do this, right? And they, in fact, may already be making changes with their own landscapers. And just by educating the community since this summer, we may already see a benefit in the town for the people who live here, because people may have already started to take action with respect to their own landscaper, right? I know that when I came home from my walk today, my landscaper had 2 of them out there today. I thought, I've got to call Mario, because now I see that, I'm just going to need to make a phone call to him myself. And so just by doing that, I'm already thinking about it differently. And there's probably a lot of the people, certainly a lot of people who have written to us, feeling very strongly about this. I would hope that those people would also be picking up their own phones and saying, even if we don't have a ban, I want you to make this change on your truck for my yard, right?
I can support that too, Steve. And then I'll give the floor back to you, Franny. I use Shorb, who supposedly has battery operated blowers, but they've never once used them at my house. And I just signed my contract for next year with them. And I wrote it into my contract that to use the battery powered leaf blowers. I mean, I didn't need the ban I just needed to be educated. And so I wrote that in, that if at all possible, please use the battery powered leaf blower on my property. So
yeah, that's sort of what I was saying about the education, is that I don't actually feel like we need to educate the landscapers. They know what the options are, and they're being told by their bosses what to use, and they go out and use them.
We need to educate the owners.
Yeah, I think the owners, okay, that's fine. I agree with you, Robin.
If you listen to the landscapers, what they're saying is, don't blow all the leaves away. And actually, Walter Ray was saying that the other night, and so was Kelly.
Yeah.
And the point is that they are, we need to learn how to use our leaves. The landscapers are willing to teach us, as long as we don't want the solution of blowing all our leaves away.
yeah, I mean, Robin, do you use a landscaper?
I don't normally use a landscaper.
You don't. Steve, do you? I can't hear you. You're
You're
muted.
Something happened to his audio, maybe.
Disney show. I can't
There
get to
you
my
are,
unmute.
you're there.
There we go.
You're back.
We used landscaper once. He tore up some plants that were not weeds, but they were plants, and we haven't had anybody else back since.
Right, so you two come at it from a different place, you know, because you don't have a relationship with your landscaper.
Well,
or-
I mean, I have a relationship with several landscapers. I know
Okay.
a number of them because I was chair of the Environment Committee, of course. And, you know, but the ones I know, I mean, Kelly is obviously one, Edda Marie Mate is another. And I know John Shorb, and I know Walter Ray and his brother. But they are very knowledgeable. But what they're saying is that when they sign contracts, what their owners want is for the leaves to be blown away.
Yeah.
So they can have perfect lawns, and
That's
actually
what Matt
both
said the
leaves
other
away, you're
night.
going to have a crummy lawn.
But that's what Matt said, that our landscapers for the town reported the same problems. You know, he gave a report the other night and he said, I asked our staff about this, and we as a town have asked them to clear the leaves from certain areas. And this is the report we got, was that it was less effective. So I don't actually, I mean, while I think our education has been good, and I would hope that we would continue to educate the community about this, I really, truly am more focused on the date being, when do we start being able to issue fines to people? And, you know, if what I'm hearing from Steve and from Matt is, oh, well, we don't really have the intention of issuing fines, we just want to educate people. Well, then why does it matter what the date of the ban is, in a way, you know? Because what it does is,
Franny, I do want to bring in that the county, in fact, if you remember, for the pesticide ordinance, said that for the first year they were using education only.
Yeah, I remember that. And I thought that was a good way to implement a ban, because they came out very publicly and said, we will not be issuing fines. We haven't baked anything like that in here.
I'd be happy to see that in the motion, that we use education only in the first year. What I'm hoping is education should be sufficient. And certainly, you know.
But that's a big change, because what the concerns that we have been raising about timing and implementation have to do with how long it will take some of these landscaping companies to essentially fully comply with these rules for our community and for neighboring communities. And the neighboring communities built in 2 to 3 years in order for that to happen. And in order for us, you know, and then now we're proposing 1 year. And so my concern is, why would we propose less time than our neighboring communities?
Well,
I mean, I don't need to be educated as to the risk.
I'll throw out that I can give you arguments for why to do that now. But what I would appreciate the next time you're doing this, to share that argument with me before you put it into the Town Journal, because you did put that argument into the Town Journal before it was shared with me or with Steve.
Wait,
I didn't have a chance to comment.
Why wouldn't we? Look, I mean, that's what
well,
we're
I
talking
mean,
about tonight.
obviously there is a real advantage in multiple communities launching an initiative at the same time. And so that is one of the strong reasons for doing it in 2022, because Chevy Chase Village and DC are also doing it at that time. We're all doing it at the same time. We can have a common education, a common campaign across us. That has real value.
But the town of Chevy Chase has decided otherwise, so it's not like all neighboring communities. Everybody is not on the same page.
Yeah, I understand the town of Chevy Chase is doing a 2-stage process, but I don't know all the details of the town of Chevy Chase. But what I am saying is
They're
that
not instituting a ban.
we can be in step with a very large community, DC, and a community that is twice our size, Chevy Chase Village, by starting in 2022.
Chevy Chase Village started its education campaign before it even put a ban in place.
And as you know, our environment committee.
Can I finish, Robin? So
Sorry.
according to the forums that we heard from the Chevy Chase Village people, they went out and talked to residents. They went out and sought out landscape companies before they ever had the legislation.
Can I let me tell you who did this. I did it, actually. And the reason why, what happened was that I was participating with the other towns in the initial development of this proposal. And I said, look, What we need to do now is develop the list of companies who will offer these services now. And I remember meeting with the guy from DC, so that's a great idea. Why don't you share your list with us? We were all working together on it. And we
You
did
were working
develop
with it
that
on behalf
list.
of
Listen, let me
Somerset?
finish.
Well, I'm,
Okay. So we did develop that list, and actually the town of Chevy Chase posted it on their site, which was just the agreement that they would do it, and then we could all share the list. There were 6 landscapers on the list.
I'm
So
sorry, how many landscapers?
6 landscapers on the list who already are using battery powered. We're using battery powered was 18 months ago when it went up. We have been working together on this, and as for regards to education, we've been educating the town on it for some time, in fact.
I haven't seen anything from the Environment Committee, and from what Steve just said, we're now planning to hire a consultant, that it won't be. the environment- Excuse me, Robin, please let me finish
Go
now.
ahead.
According to what Steve said, we're now planning to hire Kelly, and she's going to walk around and talk to the landscapers. And I didn't see that line item in the budget. But it sounds like we're doing something very different from what the village did. The village, I sat in on that meeting, Robin, and the people within the village did all of that work. And we're now talking about bringing in a consultant to do all that work. And that's, I just heard Barton Rubenstein say that they've been working on, when he called to try and convince me to push it through, he said the Environment Committee has been working on this since July. That was a month before he became the chair. And that may be true, but I have not seen one piece of educational information from that committee, not one.
Well, all right. There have been multiple journal articles. I wrote a number of them on managing leaves. I've actually called one Managing Leaves actually recently.
But nothing, no pamphlets is what I'm speaking of. I'm not talking about the journal.
So in other words, there's been a steady drumbeat in the town for some time on the idea of we can do better in terms of not just using blowers, but also managing leaves. And that I, as chair of the Environment Committee, was doing that 4 years ago.
I understand.
And was working with the other communities, as I mentioned.
I think those are all good things in actually in the balance of things. But what concerns me a little bit more is, if we're going to try to get this passed, we need to agree on the implementation date. And I, for one, I don't like the idea of passing legislation where we sort of have a, written or unwritten agreement that we're not going to enforce it for a year. So instead of doing that, I would rather have the implementation date be another year later. But, I think the point that I'm trying to just make is, even if you have found 6 landscaping companies that are fully committed to battery power only, that's not what we're asking our residents to do. We're not asking them to stop working with their current landscapers. I mean, that is one option for people. I would think anybody who lives here knows that they have the option of looking in the market to find somebody different to do their work. But I think what we're talking about is, how long are we willing to give companies in this town to comply before we start issuing fines? And from my point of view, less than a year is not a good amount of time. And closer to 2 years is a better amount of time. So,
how about this? July 2022, and the first year is education only. We have until July 2022 to educate the owner. I think it's the owners who need the education. Frankly,
I think education. I think education is good, but I think from the landscaper's point of view, it's less about education and it's more about the time they need to transfer their equipment from one type to another.
And Robin, also people sign contracts, since you don't work yourself with a landscaper, the contracts come out typically in December and January. So switching it up mid-year just doesn't make sense. It needs to be a January start date. because people sign their contracts. That's just the bottom line. So it has to be a January start. People aren't going to switch contractors mid-contract. It's just not going to happen. And the town will be if you all do a good job educating residents, which you've already started to do, and Robin, you say you've been doing it for years, this town will be every bit as quiet whether or not you have that ban. And it will allow people to work with their landscape contractors. It will allow them to talk to their neighbors instead of posting nasty emails on the listserv. And we'll just be a better community because we'll work together towards this. And we will be every bit as quiet without the ban. And I'm actually, I find it really distasteful that you feel that you have to have a law to make in place to make the community work together towards the common good. That is just not necessary. People can talk to their neighbors. They don't need a law saying that you're going to be scolded for doing this.
Well, sorry, let me speak for a moment. I respectfully disagree with you, Barbara. I think the only way we will actually achieve compliance with the elimination of using gas-powered leaf blowers in Somerset is if we have a law. We need to have a law. We need to mandate it. I've been working on this, well, for about 3 years now, working with the Environment Committee. They posted lots of articles. I think the town is generally familiar with the topic. That's why we've received such strong support. I mean, over 500 individuals, 160 households, tremendous support to put this ban in place.
And 2 opposed.
Oh,
Well, people might not want to participate. You know, some people just don't want to get into the.
no, they might not. They might not, but the people who did participate, it's overwhelming support.
But we don't know what the
And
other
the comments
250
about-
households think.
Right, you just don't know that, Steve, because
They don't care one way or the other.
the survey didn't
Oh my
say
gosh.
to oppose a ban in 2023. It said, are you for a ban in 2022? The survey was not properly done. I mean, I wish that we had instituted the committee rules so that the council could have reviewed the survey before it went out.
But I think we're getting away from the point,
Okay.
which is that we
I think you're getting
agree
away.
on banning. We agree on getting to a point where we impose a ban. At least I do agree with Steve on that. I know it's distasteful to think that we need that, but I do think you have to have it on the books. And I understand that. I think it is appropriate for the council and not the environmental committee, but the council to be talking about what the on-ramp looks like for implementation. And we've heard from the environmental committee, and I appreciate the advice that they're giving, but I'm also thinking at it from the point of view of literally how do we implement this law in the town of Somerset with the staff that we have and with the time that's proposed. And that is why I just think that we should look at the model set by the communities that have adopted this ban, where they've built in a 2 and a 3-year implementation period. And we should take that approach. Has nothing to do with whether or not you need to persuade me that we need to ban this equipment. My point is, if you say to me, oh, well, we just want, to have a year of no implementation, then I'm going to be embarrassed to say that council has adopted a law, but we're not going to implement it for a year. I think that's the wrong approach to take.
This exactly is the problem that you created when you wrote that letter to the Town Journal, with the 3 of you collaborating on it without consulting either Steve or myself, because there are absolutely counter arguments to what you're saying, and you hadn't listened to them. You've now made up your minds 2023 is right. If you had talked to us earlier, we could have said, look, the world is different now.
You would have persuaded me. That's
You let
different
me-
than saying,
Franny, give me a chance, okay?
okay, but you're saying that
What
my
I'm-
opinion's
what I'm
not
trying to
valid.
What I'm trying to tell you now is, and that's why I asked the question of Walter Ray, how much of his commitment of his business is in DC, and the answer was 20%. They are already converting to battery, as is John Shorb converting to battery, as is a bunch of landscapers converting to battery, because there is such a large market that is requiring it to happen. That was
But
not
that's all
the
to the
case when
good.
listen, let me finish. That was
I
not
know.
the case when Chevy Chase Village or DC came in with their bans. So we have a very different group of landscapers now, and that is why it is easier for us to have a shorter timeline. And Chevy Chase Village had a shorter timeline than DC for the same reason, because the landscapers had already started with DC. And if you had listened to me and asked those questions before you wrote that article, then you might have been more open to this argument, but you're not open to this argument now because you wrote the article and you've taken a public position.
Robin, and you're not open to
Fair.
our argument. I can't believe you're saying that. I honestly can't believe you're saying that we're not open to your argument. You're not open to our argument. So
Robin, I've already made it clear that I've come around to agreeing to ban gas powered leaf blowers when I did not think that that was necessary in August.
look,
So I feel like I've already come a long way, and certainly writing an article has not changed my point of view on this at all. It was just expressing to the community
Nor of any argument.
another
that I've
point
made.
of view that could be considered, and that might in fact be palatable to people who say, I don't really want this, but
I
all right,
asked you-
if there's time, then maybe I can make this happen.
I ask you, if you find there's a disagreement among council in the future, not to write an article with three of you to the Town Journal and make your
Well, we
arguments
could get
public, but to
into
share it
how to
with the
treat each other
council as a
better,
whole,
and
so that we can all agree or agree to disagree, as the case may be.
I just
Robin,
want
we've
to,
had enough problems lately.
I want to point out that we are past our endpoint, and I appreciate the really lively conversation we've been having. But I think our last agenda item is to pick a date for our next work session. Are Thursdays the best evening? I mean, we're 5 to 7 on Thursdays. If so, is the 12th good? It's Lincoln's birthday, but it's not, that's not a holiday. I think the holiday is the Monday.
Wait, Marnie,
Works for me.
wait, which night?
The Friday.
Oh, I'm sorry, not the 12th. I'm the Thursday, the 11th. The only problem with that, that's the ZTA hearing.
Oh, is it?
But if we meet from 5 to 7,
What time is the ZTA hearing?
7:30, I think.
It's up to your call. You want to do it a different night?
Probably would be better to do it a different night.
The Stormwater Committee meeting is the 9th of February.
And the Environment Committee meets the 10th.
About the 8th.
Monday, I thought Monday wasn't good for Franny, is that right?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so we could do 5 to 7 on Monday, the 8th.
Yep, that works for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
I appreciate
Works
it.
for me.
Madam
Thank you very
President, can
much.
we also do we didn't schedule our meeting with the town manager. Can we do it that afternoon at 1:30? Can you?
Yes,
Thank you.
Me? Yep.
Matt, can you do it then?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Good
well, I
night.
thank you all for your participation tonight.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Right.
Hey,
Good
Good evening.
you.